From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And during our first half hour today, we'll visit with K-State's KC Olson. He'll report on his continuing study of late summer prescribed pasture burning in Kansas. He'll tell of the ongoing positive results of this approach in controlling sericea lespedeza. And he says this burning alternative is also showing to be of significant benefit in suppressing another invasive species, Old World bluestem. In addition, KC now has numbers to report on how late summer burning affects stocker cattle gains. Those have come in quite favorably. We'll cover it all with KC next. And later on, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven checks in with another Stop, Look, and Listen. Plus more on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome to our midweek edition of Agriculture Today. During this first part of the program, we're going to pass along to you the latest findings from an ongoing series of studies out of K-State's Animal Sciences and Industry Department. Now, you grassland managers likely have heard about this alternative to spring prescribed burning, summertime burns or early fall burns, and what those can do in terms of invasive species control and the resulting impacts on growth and performance of the stocker calves on those pastures. Well, filling us in on the latest findings on all of this now is range cattle scientist at K-State, KC Olson, who is spearheading all of this work. So back to the origins of this, Casey, if you would, and talk about what started you down this path of looking at these alternative burning times.
Well, Eric, it's probably due to the fact that we tried a lot of other things and nothing really worked to a satisfactory degree. You know, and it was 2009 when I got interested in the sericea problem here in the Flint Hills. And I'm not ashamed to admit part of that interest came because I'm a landowner in the Flint Hills and I had a sericea problem.
You got to thinking about the traditional spring burn and the fact that sericea lespedeza has been able to weather those burns routinely. And then popped up the idea of what about burning at a different time in the season, right?
Certainly. You know, and it had to do with my limited understanding of plant physiology at that point. We're 8 years into this process. And I just knew that, every plant on the prairie has got a silver bullet. We had 60 years of history of spring burnings not controlling sericea lespedeza. But I thought, what if we apply fire at a time when at least the plant has the appearance of vulnerability, namely at the point of flowering or the beginning of seed set.
Which meant roughly late August, early September, what?
That's what it meant. So, we know that sericea is going to have mature seed on it usually by November 1st. We wanted to touch it, so to speak, before it had the chance to make viable mature seed. We started the process in 2014. By the summer of 2016, we could visually detect that we were having a pretty strong effect. And we did something a little reckless. At our research site in Geary County, we asked to be part of the Kansas Livestock Association Summer Field Day Series so that people could see it for themselves. And we had 9 large plots in that study that were about 14 acres apiece. We had continuously monitored plant transects, no animals yet at that point. We had continuously monitored plant transects in each one of those plots. Each plot was burned either on an average date of April 1st, an average date of August 1st, or an average date of September 1st. And, before we were done, we knew that we had a pretty exciting solution, a pretty exciting talking point for the people of the Flint Hills. So at the end of it all, we ended up with less than 2% sericea lespedeza basal cover on our true and alternative fire treatments, and more than 11% basal cover of sericea lespedeza on our traditional spring treatment. And not only did we have less basal cover, we almost totally suppressed seed production in each of the 4 years that we burned in the off-season. The plants that survived were smaller, they were lighter, and they were just generally much less robust. And today, if you go to that site, we haven't touched it since the fall of 2017. If you go to that site today, it's still very, very clean looking.
We share that previous work to set up what you've found to date in the most recent iterations of this research. And you've actually expanded the scope even further?
We have. So with the pilot data, if you want to call it that we had, and with the great help of our sitting dean, Dr. Ernie Minton, we were able to find funding to bring this to a commercial scale where, our fire treatments would be much larger geographically, and we could put an economically relevant number of cattle on a economically relevant number of treated pastures and just see what happens with livestock performance. And we're continuing with, an expanded level of plant monitoring. But the performance data is pretty exciting after basically 3 years of treatment and 2 summers of conventional intensive early stocker grazing.
We want to come back to that performance component. It's obviously a key part of this whole story. But you have discovered, you say, not only will these summer or early fall burns be effective against sericea lespedeza, but perhaps other invasive species.
Well, that is what we're beginning to suspect. Now, one of the hot invasive species topics in Kansas right now are the so-called old world bluestems. They're really not bluestems, in a totally different genus from our native bluestems, but they have some pretty aggressive invasive characteristics. One is colloquially called yellow bluestem. The other one is Caucasian bluestem. It's another one of those things that we did to ourselves. They were seed or hay was brought into the state and was cultivated, and in many cases has supplanted the native vegetation. So my associate, Alan Teichman, and I, we were burning in September of 2018. And, at that time, yellow bluestem is particularly visible. And so we GPSed some patches of yellow bluestem, and then we burned it. We came back the next year, and we couldn't find it. And so we started to ask around, and sure enough, some early adopters of late summer burning were reporting some of the same things. There was yellow bluestem here. I was all in knots about it. And now it's gone or it's greatly diminished. Well, that following spring, there was a paper published out of South Texas that, with one prescribed fire treatment on a yellow bluestem infestation, 3 years later, they were still able to measure significant control of that one treatment. Well, consequently, at our site in the stocker unit, where we continue to measure basically all plant responses to fire regime, but especially sericea lespedeza and yellow bluestem, well, the only place we now still have sericea and yellow bluestem is on our spring fire treatment. Both our summer and our fall, I'm sure that the plants are there, but they're just not there at a detectable level.
And you had a similar experience at a site near Canopolis Lake?
Okay, slightly different, though.
Okay.
So a good friend of ours, I won't mention any names, but a beloved alumni of animal sciences and industry has been encouraging me for several years to, hey, when you get done with this sericea lespedeza rampage that you're on, why don't you think about old world bluestem? And, oh gosh, it was about 3 years ago I went out with this gentleman and looked at some property that he owned. Couldn't tell it at the time, but obviously it was degraded with old world bluestem in a really powerful way. But the population was not yellow bluestem, it was Caucasian bluestem. And as far as I know, there is nothing in the literature right now that evaluated the use of fire, or particularly timed fire, for Caucasian bluestem control. So we packed up all of our things and we went out there. We measured the plant community in the summer of 2018. And in August of 2018, we burned about 18, I believe, 1 acre patches, and we had some non-burned controls. A year later, Okay, we thought we were going to burn it again in 2 consecutive years, but it's a drier climate, it's a different soil type. There was not significant enough litter accumulation in a year, we thought, to carry a fire. But a year post-treatment, when we again measured plant community characteristics, we saw some things that were just eye-popping. So with 1 year of treatment, there was a 38% reduction in Caucasian bluestem basal cover, so down by well over a third. There was replacing that Caucasian bluestem, coming back into the community and expressing 2 to 3 more native grass species on the burn treatment and 3 to 5 more native forb species on the treatment. When you work that out as a percentage basis, that's a 20 to 40% increase in native species richness.
Mm-hmm. And that's important, that ecosystem balance that you're trying to find.
You and I were talking before the program. When you don't have forbs in particular in a plant community, which both the old world bluestems are notorious for choking out native forbs, if you don't have forbs, you don't have arthropods. If you don't have arthropods, you're likely to not have the native birds that feed upon those arthropods wanting to use that particular habitat.
So you've simply, on the side of invasive species control, built upon your earlier work, successfully so, Casey, it sounds.
Well, I wish I could take credit for all this. It's just a situation that I was put into, and resources were given to me quite generously to make the investigation. I'm blessed to have really talented people around me that, frankly, know more than I do about plant identification and wildlife habitat quality. So it's been a team effort, and it couldn't have happened anywhere but Kansas State University.
But the looming question, you touched upon it earlier, from the very outset of this concept coming together, would cattle perform equitably on a summer burned pasture compared to a spring burned pasture? And you've come up with some numbers to work with there, which we want to get into after we take this break. KC Olson is with us, range cattle scientist at Kansas State University. We'll be back with KC shortly here on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Now on Agriculture Today, we continue our conversation with K-State range cattle scientist KC Olson. He's reporting in on the latest research findings from his ongoing and ever-growing project looking at alternate burning times for conducting a prescribed fire on our grasslands in Kansas. And we talked just moments ago about some of the very impressive gains that have been made in controlling invasive species, including sericea lespedeza and old world bluestems in preliminary findings through the burns that would take place in August or early September. But again, Casey, folks have asked, will this system work and still not compromise stocker cattle gains as they would graze those new burn systems? And you've been intently looking at that of late.
Well, sure. I mean, that was one of the first criticisms we received. In spite of getting some pretty good leverage on sericea lespedeza, oh gosh, we probably aren't going to be able to afford to do this because it's just going to butcher the summer gains on our yearling cattle that we graze. Well, maybe our first approach to that question is, okay, how much performance can we give up on an individual animal basis where we're using herbicide exclusively to control sericea lespedeza and break even? So the comparison was a typical spring grazing scenario with a commonly used herbicide like Escort or fire alone. So the cost of treating the footprint that a stocker steer would normally occupy with fire is about $2.25, as a rancher would do it. Okay, the cost to treat that same acreage with Escort in a comprehensive way at about $18 an acre would be $54. to treat that footprint. And based on the margin, which is about $52, we figured out, based on the value of gain, how much performance could we afford, how much less performance, rather, could we afford to take before we'd be break even on giving up on the chemical battle. The numbers were pretty big. It's going to vary a little bit from year to year, but it's been consistent over the last 3 years. You can give up about 70 pounds of total weight gain and use fire instead of herbicide to control sericea, or you can use fire in a conventional way and you can be bound to using that herbicide for the foreseeable future. So keep that in mind. About 70 pounds of weight gain difference, you'd still be breaking even using fire instead of a different fire season and herbicide.
So that was the benchmark then, that 70 pounds you were using to evaluate performance of stockers on a traditionally burned pasture vis-a-vis a later burned pasture.
True. At the stocker unit, we're now 3 years of plant data and 2 years of cattle grazing into the process. We've seen some pretty exciting things. We just wanted to share those with people. In year one, with 6 pastures per treatment and conventional intensive early stocking density, there were small differences between our 3 burn regimes, which were April, August, and early fall. There were small differences in performance, but they were not major. I was encouraged by that. The second year, in which we used the same stocking density, the same length of grazing season. We had steers instead of heifers that second year. We had a very strong difference in growth performance in favor of the summer cattle. The cattle that graze the summer burn pastures, to the exclusion of cattle grazing spring burn pastures and cattle grazing fall burn pastures. So much so that the effect of the previous year was wiped out. There was no treatment by year interaction, as we say in the vernacular of statistics. At this point, what we're telling people is we are ready to start making some judgments here. Basically, over 2 years, performance of the cattle that graze spring burn pastures and summer burn pastures was equivalent. The cattle that grazed the true fall burn season were just a few pounds behind.
A few pounds not amounting to the 70 pounds that you were talking of.
No, it was right around 20. It was right around 20. So if our alternative, to a different fire season is continued use of herbicide, we're still going to be money ahead whether we burn in the late summer or the fall.
That's not a small declaration, is it, when you consider everything that's been wondered about these systems, KC? Well,
it is what it is. Data kind of speaks for itself. Mm-hmm. We're totally prepared to reverse this conclusion if we see different trends over the next 4 years. That's how long we're scheduled to run with this project. We've tried to be transparent in the past with this line of work as people are ravenously curious about what we're seeing. And, if people aren't talking about it, they aren't trading ideas, they aren't trying things in their own operations, no progress gets made. And I don't want to wait for 4 more years, to help these hills be healthier.
Now, of course, gains are associated with long-term grass health as well. So you're going to be watching that very closely?
Absolutely. I think with our pilot scale study in Geary County, we established that, we can do this consecutively for 4 years and see trends toward improving rangeland health. We're seeing some slightly different responses, not negative, but slightly different responses in a grazed ecosystem. And it's really been exciting to unpack that data and just see what treasures are there.
So the story unfolds continually here. KC, you've had a great number of producers inquire about this approach from all the angles. So what is your general recommendation to somebody who is yet to dabble in summer or early fall burn regime and would like to at least try it out?
Well, the first thing I would encourage people to do is not to take my word for it. Talk to the neighbors that are trying it. Because I think just about everywhere you would go in these Flint Hills, you're going to be able to see a plume of smoke in the months of August or September. You're likely to know those people that are giving it a try. By all means, if you're able to ask them what they think. 1 or 2 years post-treatment. So we've been blessed in this process to have several large operations that are early adopters. I've had the opportunity to watch them not only use the technique but improve upon it. Finding ways to make it easier, for example, to light and sustain a growing season fire that, frankly, I never thought of. But our earliest adopters are now in the 5th year of using prescribed fire in that interval of time, and they're reporting fantastic results, some of which I've seen with my own eyes.
And once more, a fair amount of this has been done in the tall grass growing regions. Are you interested in looking at broadening the geographical footprint of this approach?
Well, I know that people's attitudes about prescribed fire are not uniformly positive around the state. From recent work that's come out of the University of Nebraska, the Great Plains need more fire and not less. Every year we're giving up tremendous acreage to increased woody encroachment. Every year we hear about catastrophic wildfires in the Great Plains region. We have only begun to tap the potential of prescribed fire for ecosystem management and improvement. And it's my hope that we can take an open mind, moving into the future.
If any producer would like to know more, you have been very good to avail yourself to talk one-on-one with individuals. You continue to do so, KC?
Absolutely. Anybody that emails me or calls and asks questions about prescribed fire, I'm happy to share with them what I know. If I can get permission, I'm happy to connect them with practitioners in their area that can maybe offer some sage advice. One thing that I should have mentioned earlier and I failed to do so, if you continue to allow your grazable acreage to be eroded by sericea, lespedeza, and perhaps the old world bluestems, that's for every acre that is occupied, you have lost an acre of carrying capacity. I tell my students here at Kansas State University the most important job they will ever do on the ranch is figure out ways to add 2 more units of inventory, Because if you're breaking even on 100 head, for example, and you can now run 102 because of back labor, those last 2 are pure profit.
Yep.
So using fire, which is low cost, which is low risk during the months of August and early September, and helps us be a better neighbor with respect to smoke management, is an excellent way to take back those invaded acres and build your carrying capacity.
For so many reasons, a cause behind all of this work, and you will continue to look further into this in the years to come, KC, but we do appreciate the briefing right here on some very important findings in the midstream of your research on this.
Eric,
Thanks
it's always great to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. He is a range cattle scientist at Kansas State University. Once again, for several years now, has vested a great deal of effort into the aspects of alternate burn times for conducting prescribed burning on our Kansas grasslands, primarily those being the late summer or early fall, however you might define it. KC Olson with us on Agriculture Today. And we must step aside for a few moments. When we return, we'll have today's top stories from the agricultural news page for you, plus much more here on the K-State Radio Network. Please keep it right here.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
You're tuned in to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Welcome back. Eric Atkinson here. Now over to today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Yesterday, a group of farm organizations announced a set of proposals for how agriculture should tackle climate change, as they expect to see more aggressive measures taken to lower greenhouse gas emissions under the incoming president. Joe Biden's campaign plan called for decarbonizing the food and agricultural sector and leveraging agriculture to remove carbon dioxide from the air and store it in the ground. Biden's plan proposes the U.S. economy achieve net zero emissions by the year 2050. The Food and Agriculture Climate Alliance, as it's called, unveiled work started last February to develop recommendations for federal climate policy involving agriculture and forestry. 4 groups co-chair this alliance: the American Farm Bureau Federation, the National Farmers Union, the National Council of Farmer Cooperatives, and the Environmental Defense Fund. This alliance also includes the Food Industry Association, the National Alliance of Forest Owners, the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, and the Nature Conservancy. Now, these groups started meeting last February once more. The president and CEO of the National Council of Farmer Cooperatives, Chuck Connor, he's a former deputy agriculture secretary, as you'll recall, said that leaders in agriculture needed to offer some climate solutions rather than allow everyone else to make policy decisions that would affect farmers and livestock producers. Increasingly, it's becoming more important for agricultural groups to be at the table with environmental organizations, he says, which is why the leaders from the groups such as the Environmental Defense Fund were included early on. This alliance proposes some key principles: that any program for agriculture should be voluntary and should provide a market incentive as the best option moving forward. Whatever programs are developed for farmers, ranchers, and landowners, they say, also need to provide science-based outcomes as a result. And finally, they say solutions for agriculture should promote growth and resiliency in rural America as well. The U.S. meat production sector will likely boost production across the board in 2021. That's according to the latest USDA outlook. And more on that now from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
Even with COVID-19 disrupting U.S. meat production facilities, the makers of meat will still manage to top last year's meat and poultry output by a bit over 1.5%. And what about 2021? The answer in 2 words:
continued growth.
But maybe not as much growth as we will have had in this crazy year. This from USDA's Outlook Board Chairman Mark Jekanowski, and he says we'll likely see total meat and poultry production this year at 106.6 billion pounds.
Next year, we see that going up by a little less than 1 billion pounds to 107.47 billion pounds.
Only an increase of about 0.8%. 2021's production breaks out like this. Beef will see a very small increase, maybe 0.5%. Pork expansion may slow to only about a 1% increase. The same for broiler output. Oh, and mustn't forget turkeys, especially now. Turkey production this year not expanding. It's likely to drop by about 1%. USDA expects a small increase in output next year, not enough to get back to 2019's output. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
On a related note, a Chekhov-funded program is now working to educate students about beef. Scarlett Hagens tells us here this program benefits family and consumer science, food classes, and pro-start programs.
The Kansas Beef Council's Beef Certificate Program provides financial support for the purchase of beef for use in classroom lessons about lean beef selection, storage, preparation, and nutrition. In addition to monetary assistance, the program provides standards-based lesson plans, educational videos, and other resources that can be used to engage students in the learning process. Recently created curriculums aim to offer secondary-level students a greater understanding of beef production and include interactive, in-person, and virtual learning options that provide information about the beef life cycle and the role beef plays in a healthy and sustainable diet. Chekhov-funded curriculums like these create greater beef literacy, leading to more in-depth investigations and activities that help guide the conversation about the journey of beef from pasture to plate. There were 117 Kansas middle and high schools approved for the Beef Certificate Program for the 2019-2020 school year. This allowed a reach of 12,478 students in 41 counties across the state. Programs such as these are made possible through the investment of beef producers. To learn more about how beef checkoff dollars are invested in programs and resources that connect with both consumers and producers, visit the new Beef Hub on the Kansas Beef Council website located at kansasbeef.org. I'm Scarlett Hagans.
And very much in the category of good news, Kansas State University returned to the pinnacle of livestock judging in the U.S. when its team captured the North American International Livestock Exposition title yesterday. The victory marks the 15th national championship for K-State's livestock judging program. It's the first since 1998 when the squad won its 5th in a row. The team's coach, K-State animal scientist Chris Mullenix, yesterday's win capping a strong season in which the team won its last 5 contests, including the American Royal in Kansas City. For the record, Texas Tech was the national runner-up. Oklahoma State was in third. Kansas State landed 4 individuals in the top 8 overall en route to that team win. Skylar Scotton of Nevada, Missouri, and Daniel Dobbs of Carnesville, Georgia, placed 2nd and 3rd, respectively. Chisholm Grund of Sharon Springs, Kansas, and Austin Wieselmeyer of Amherst, Colorado, were 6th and 8th, respectively. Team members Cagney Effling of Highmore, South Dakota, Justin Slaybaugh of Goshen, Indiana, and Wieselmeyer were named All-Americans, and Chris Mullenix was named the National Coach of the Year. This win also, by the way, broke a string of 4 consecutive reserve national championships by K-State. In addition to being the overall national championship team, K-State won first place in the categories of overall reasons, beef, beef reasons, and performance beef. The squad 2nd in sheep and goats, 3rd in swine. Other members of this year's team include Madison Andrade of San Juan Bautista, California, Lane Egger of Columbus, Nebraska, Sam Gleason of Maple Hill, Kansas, and Trace Mulligan of Scott City, Kansas. Graduate student Peyton Dahmer was an assistant coach. So our heartiest of congratulations to the K-State livestock judging team led by Coach Chris Mullenix, 2020 national champions. Remember, if you'd like to hear a replay of any of our broadcasts or would like to subscribe to an automatic download of each day's broadcast, it's very simple. Go to agtoday.net and you'll find out all the details. That is agtoday.net. And you're listening to Agriculture Today.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
Staying calm, I got up and went to the front door.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
I was working at my desk when my wife, Anneke, stepped in and with a much worried face said, "Come look, a big bird just flew into the tree next to the house, and I think it hurt itself." Staying calm, I got up and went to the front door. The moment I opened it and stepped out, I saw the big bird. It flapped its mighty wings and slowly rose and flipped away itself from the branches. It had struck the grown Bradford pear tree with its many branches, sturdy, thick trunks. There's still a few leaves on the tree, but most have dropped. As I looked at where the bird had landed and had risen from, I saw more movement. I watched a squirrel slowly scamper up the tree. The warmth of the sun rays lit up his golden fur coat. As he slowly climbed, it acted dazed. All was in slow motion. Slow motion for a chatty squirrel. The whole scenario instantly made sense to me. The big bird had flown into the tree, not by accident as Annika thought. No, it had taken a dive and indeed captured its prey, a squirrel. The big bird was the red-tailed hawk, who lives and hangs around our hill. It had caught its meal for the day. It must have captured and held the squirrel and was ready to finish it off when I stepped outside. Instead of holding on to the prey and lifting off, it dropped it and left it. The hawk felt caught so close to the house. It flapped its wings and twisted away between the branches. It was indeed a big bird with the wide wingspan needed to get off the ground with prey. My eyes did not stay with the bird, but I concentrated on the dazed squirrel slowly climbing the tree. I can just imagine as it slowly climbed, mumbling, "That was close. I thought I was a goner." It reminded me of an Aztec offering where, to appease their gods, they would sacrifice a young man and rip out his heart while being held down by priests. There was a lot more ceremony to that than the squirrel's sacrifice would have been to still the hunger. But I could just imagine the hawk's claws holding the squirrel down and the hawk fiercely looking around to kill. But he didn't. It was not given the time. It flew away. But I can well imagine the squirrel pressed into the thick bed of fallen leaves, looking up into those fierce eyes, saying, "I got you." I know from having watched the hawk sitting on a branch overlooking the front lawn that it has had its eyes on the squirrel for quite a while, and I apologized to the hawk. After all, it was a meal, but it was just an apology. I came outside to help it because my wife thought the bird had crashed and hurt itself. And to be honest, in a few moments that I stepped outside, my mind raced how I would capture a big bird safely, expecting a broken wing, and taking it to the veterinarian school. Surely they could fix it. All those thoughts went through my mind in the few seconds it took to step outside. But it was a well-planned murder, which I stopped just in time. Totally different scenario. I haven't thought much about the hawk anymore, except I look for it as I walk the hill. The other day, when there was a stiff breeze from the south, I watched it drifting, gliding, much like the vultures do on the updraft in front of our hill. The hawk is not as steady a drifter as the vulture is. The vulture is bigger and a heavier bird, hence the wind does not throw it about. The hawk seems to be tossed more, but it also is a good flyer, and it may be that it thoroughly enjoyed being tossed by the wind. It came sweeping down at times. I don't think it saw me as I stood against the tree watching it. If it did see me, it was not afraid and felt at home, showing off. I wondered about the squirrel. I used to see two of them. Lately, I've only seen one hopping near the bird feeders. It could very well be that one of them, the younger one, has been caught and now provides the energy to fly and float. Could easily be. The hawk is around. Squirrels, beware. I did see a squirrel back on the front lawn, busy burying acorns, planting trees. That's risky business, as the open lawn is surrounded by trees. On another day, when Annika pointed out a big bird, no doubt the same hawk, at first I didn't see it. It sat so well camouflaged against the branches. Small birds were pestering it, but it ignored them. It's surprising that the red hawk, which prefers the wild places, will nest in the more urban areas. We are on the edge of town. The average territory is about 2 square miles. That fits in our neighborhood. Soaring is part of the hawk's activity, and I enjoy watching it. However, I admit I can only watch it for so long, as I have other things to do. And this may be a big mistake, as the soaring between two hawks, going higher and higher, then falling, can be exhilarating as you watch the power of these birds and their agility. I hope the hawk will stay around this winter, but I expect it will move south as real winter sets in. But whatever, I promise I'll keep some squirrels around. That may be a good incentive to come back next spring.
Gus van der Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. And that's our time for today. We'll be right back here, same time tomorrow. We'd invite you to rejoin us then, if you would. Meantime, Eric Atkinson bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.